Cool. So let me start by introducing myself. I'm Christine. I'm an engineering manager at Paystack. I joined late last year, and my background has been in software engineering, mostly JavaScript, lots of React and Redux developments previously. So Flutter and Dart, this has been a new experience for me. It's something I've always been interested in. I first learned about it in 2019, and I've kept up with it, but like with Flutter 2 and being able to build apps not only for both Android and iOS, but also for web, that obviously was very interesting for me as a web engineer. So I decided I had to give it a go. If you would like to connect with me or anything, you can grab my LinkedIn. I'm always here for a chat. And let's see if we can get to the next slide. So I decided I was going to try Flutter for the first time, and I was going to use the Paystack API. So Paystack is a payment service provider, and we have an amazing, well-documented API. And it was originally built for developers to enable small businesses and engineers to build their own custom payment integrations. So it was very fascinating when I first heard about this company, and we offer lots of other products as well, but we're going to be focusing on the API today. We also offer libraries, plugins, and SDKs. We even have a community-driven Flutter SDK that allows you to plug in a payment app into your own Flutter app so that you can accept payments in person, and it's awesome. So we have quite a strong community around building different integrations with different languages. And today I'm going to be building a Flutter app using the Paystack API. We're going to look at fetching data, widgets and material UI, layout Wahala. So Paystack was founded in Nigeria, and they have a language called Nigerian Pidgin, which is like slang. So Wahala means trouble. And it was one of the first things I was told when I joined, and I thought that was quite funny. And then the DevTools, as well as responsive and adaptive design. So the API I'm going to be using today is the Transactions API. It's to pull a list of all of your transactions on your merchant account. If you sign up for a free merchant account, you'll get your secret key, and you'll be able to use all of these APIs. I'll be using this list one as well as a details one. And it comes with 2 required parameters per page to display how many you want, as well as the page, and then a series of optional parameters that allow you to filter down into more granular details. And if you look in this sample response, I'm going to be using the data array over there. So fetching data from the API, as I'm sure everyone knows who's familiar with Flutter, you can do Flutter create your app, so transactions in this case, and it quickly spins up a nice little demo for you. And I decided that was going to be how I was going to start building my app and becoming more familiar with everything. So I also wanted to create an index page. I didn't want to have everything in the main.dart file. I wanted to know how I was going to do an HTTP request, how I could convert the JSON response, how do you save data to the state, and how does set state work. So as a React developer, I know what set state is, but I've never used it in Flutter. Cool. So this is the first look at the code. You can see on the left there, in the lib folder, there is a pages directory. This is where I added my index.dart file. I set up my first stateful widget and identified the 2 main variables I was going to use. So it's going to be the list array as well as an isLoading check. And then I built my fetch transactions fetch. So Flutter and Dart have this amazing repository of packages that you can install, and you add them right there into your pubsec.yaml file. You can also do it by the command line. it's incredible. Like there's literally a package for everything. So obviously grab the HTTP one, it's very well known. It has examples, installation instructions, everything you need. Set up the API call, told it how many I wanted per page, and then passed through the API key with the HTTP GET request. So very basic checked to make sure that it was coming back okay, and then decoded it with the JSON decode. And you can see I am fetching the data array straight away out of that response. And set state, again, very familiar. Just adding the transaction data to the API or returning an empty one. So this was a bit new for me. I've heard other people say that in Flutter, like everything is a widget, and I just couldn't grasp what that meant, right? So, but when you really get into it, like it is so easy to build out your presentation layer because everything literally is a widget. That rich text, the text span, everything is pre-built. It has its own layout instructions and their properties, and you can configure it and style it as you want. So I was playing around with styling the app bar. I wanted to have an inline element with the logo. I wanted to make sure that my loader on the page was in the Paystack colors. And then I decided to build the transaction list using the list view builder, which dynamically creates it for you instead of you having to like do it one by one, right? So cool, like we had a list of transactions, and after that I decided I wanted a details page. I couldn't just have an app with transactions. I wanted to know, how does routing work? So we have named routes. I wanted to, once I got a named route working, I wanted to understand how I could pass variables and create dynamic routes. So I found the onGenerateRoute function. Navigator.pushNamed, obviously navigating to the new screen, and some lessons that I learned along the way there. Right, so named routes, very easy. You go to your main.dart file, you add your routes object, you define, so / for example, is taking you to the index page, which we looked at earlier, displays my list of transactions, and the details page would take me to my new details.dart file. Great, all working. Now, how do I pass the transaction ID to the details screen? And so I used Navigator.pushNamed, and I sent it the string with the with the variable for the transaction ID within that. I understand now that as a web engineer, so when you have a website and you're navigating to a page, like for a product, for example, or something within a list to see the details, you always expect that URL to be unique. So that's kind of like how I saw this in my head. I understand now that I should have read the docs a little bit more thoroughly, because you can pass an arguments property to Navigator.pushNamed and send through the details that way. So while this works, it's not a best practice. It's not a best practice. It's not sustainable. And please don't do what I do. I should have included a slide to show you how I fixed it. But yes, just go read up on passing arguments with the Navigator. So I now had an empty details screen. And I knew that I wanted to lay the screen out a little bit differently because the transactions page was very simple. I wanted a drawer, and I wanted that drawer to only be visible on the portrait view. And I also wanted to start looking at how I could display these this layout and these widgets differently for larger formats, so landscape, as well as when it compiles to web. So I looked at the layout builder as well as media queries. So when I was building the initial layout, again, the pitfalls of a web dev in an app developer world, right? When I think of a web page, I think of it in the terms of a grid, and you would have like having two elements that expand to the full width of the screen and then a column inside that. Like, that made sense in my head. And I quickly realized that does not make sense in this context at all. This was probably the first time I really got stuck into using the widget inspector, and it's fantastic. Flutter probably has some of the best dev tools I've ever used. And I really enjoyed this feature because it shows you where you're going wrong. And then you can also change the properties of your containers to resize them and adjust the flex parameters to see like what your page would end up looking like. So once I fixed all of that, I wanted to make sure that it was going to be responsive. So I first looked at media query of, and so for media query of, you can pass it the context and then check the orientation or the size of your current app. I'm very familiar with media queries, so it made a lot of sense to me. And what's great is that if the view changes, if the person rotates their phone, or if they resize their browser, then it will rebuild as well. And the layout builder and box constraints is also really interesting. So this class gives you a builder property, and you can use the box constraints to conditionally display items. This build function also runs automatically if the user changes the app size. And what was interesting, though, is that the layout builder determines the max width and height of a particular widget, not the whole screen. So I initially used this at like a higher level in the app, and when I printed the size, it was the full view. And when I moved it lower down into a different widget, it came back with a much smaller size. And I did a little bit of reading on how box constraints work. And it's fascinating. I really enjoyed it. I love both of these features, and they're really fantastic for building different views within your responsive apps. Something else that I also found quite interesting was this idea of being able to write like functions inside your class. And a lot of examples that I saw online when I was first learning about this, there were lots of people who were writing classes. So again, I feel like I should have called this like the front-end React developers experience with Flutter. But anyway, so in React, we've started moving away from using class components and using hooks and functional components. So using widget square, for example, over there in the slide, that was like, okay, cool. It's less code, just makes sense. It's obviously like a cleaner way of writing it. No. So why would I use a stateless widget instead of a function? And it comes down to Flutter is unaware of the functions, but it can see the classes. So the widget inspector, for one, doesn't display the functions. The functions don't have a separate context. Classes provide a performance benefit because it allows you to have a more granular rebuild, and classes are less likely to introduce bugs. I have a great example. So if you look at this widget square, when I was researching this, I found this fantastic example. When you're using functions and you switch between the function component for widget square and one that looks like a circle, and you're passing it to the animated switcher, it breaks the animation. But if you write classes with stateless widgets, you can see it has that lovely fade effect instead. And then also here on the right-hand side, you can see the widget inspector will show you the square class over there underneath the animated switcher, but it doesn't display it for the functions. So final thoughts. I put this together in probably less than 24 hours collectively. It is incredibly quick to get up and running once you start using Flutter, and Dart is also fantastic. So I added a transaction list, navigated to a details page, and then added a drawer for the mobile view. And on the left, I added a standalone static menu for the transaction list and the details page. I really enjoyed using Flutter, and I will definitely be using it again in the future. And that's me.
All right, that is awesome. Sorry, it always takes a few seconds for the presenter to come back online, so sorry for letting you hang there a little bit. That was really cool, and I'm totally impressed with kind of all the things you found out in a relatively short time frame. So it shows kind of what a mature framework this is at this point, I think. My first question to you is like, how did you get along with the documentation? Like, what kind of resources did you rely on most in your learning progress?
So Flutter's documentation is great. Like they specifically, they have a page where they detail all the different types of widgets. So scrollable widgets versus like how columns are not scrollable, and then they'll have a page that'll tell you like all the widgets that are scrollable. That's great. Those are very well documented. They also get like more granular, giving you lots more details about the classes, the properties, how you can use them. Some of those pages don't have examples, but it's still very detailed, and it doesn't take too much to figure it out. And then on the same side, like the Dart documentation is awesome.
Completely agree. For the audience, I don't see any questions for Christine yet. You still have a few seconds to type something in. I hope you all found the Q&A tab. So if you want to direct a question at Christine now, you can still do that. Otherwise, we'll do another round of Q&A at the end in case something comes up. While I'm waiting for other people to pitch in, I have one more question. It sounds like basically, I'm impressed how easy the Paystack integration part was. I expected a lot more, oh, and then I did this, and then I must realize that. But it seems like basically you got the Paystack API through normal HTTP calls, and then from there, everything was your Flutter. Is that correct? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so as part of my onboarding, like you have to learn how the API works. You can download as any user, you don't need to sign up or anything. You can download a package that will open up all of the APIs in Postman. You can interrogate them yourself. It's super quick as long as you have a token. That's just the key.
Are you aware of any apps out in the world that are built on Flutter and use the Paystack API yet?
Just the community-driven SDK. It is listed on our site. It's quite cool. I wanted to incorporate it into this as well, but it didn't compile to web, and there are other contributors to that repo. So, but basically what happens is that it displays a picture of a card. It allows you to enter your bank details, and you can pay the person, and that payment will be authorized and go to the merchant account that it's associated to. It was super easy to set up. I know a few other Flutter apps, but not with Paystack.
All right. I'm sorry for always looking to the side here. I'm trying to find a setup where I have the right screen in the right place, but that doesn't seem to work. I'm just looking through the general tab briefly. I don't see any obvious questions to stick out. And there is so far nothing on the QA tab. So let's move on to the next speaker, I would say. And if you don't mind, you come back again at the end of this and we'll have another chat, okay?
Sure, that would be great.
So thank you so much so far, Christine. This was really awesome.